Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, a little bit about clothing for Magonomia. I started to write an article on trick gadgets for spies in Magonomia, but I need to step back a little and give some more basic information. Much as I need to explain what a cummerbund was if writing up James Bond's gear, I need to define some terms as we go through, so that the potential for tricking out clothing becomes more obvious. I'd like to mark that this is very basic material and suggest that if you want to wade in, there's a brilliant page at Elizabethan Costume which will let you fill your boots. First, be aware that Elizabethans try not to launder their clothes. Every time you launder your fancier clothes, you're damaging them and costing yourself money. This is why all the clothes mentioned here have really extensive sets of undecorated undergarments. You can launder those without much worry, and you can replace them far more easily than outerwear. Similarly, you'll see that the collars and sleeves of many garments come off, and this is so that you can launder and replace those individual parts without damaging expensive panels of outer fabric. Strangely, this doesn't make them as stinky as you'd imagine. This is why the Queen, her favourites, and fairies wear white linen clothes. It's a sign of ridiculous wealth. Let's start at the head. Every woman wears something that covers her hair for the sake of modesty. At its simplest, this is a coif. A coif is a cloth cap, which has a supporting wire or a layer of stiffened fabric at the hairline. Coifs are wool, unless your husband's really rich, in which case you might be allowed silk. Allowed is a legal term there. The front band of the coif gives us some potential for mischief. For example, the wire there could be used as a lockpick. The front band could be used to smuggle a small note. Generally, though, the coif is too tight to hide much. The coif also acts as the undergarment for a hood. Hoods tend to be worn by better-off women. There is a relatively recent change in fashion, so early in the reign, and more conservative women wear the English hood or gable hood, and younger women, or the more courtly, wear French hoods. I'd suggest if you have magic items that extend or protect the mind, made for women, the recent change in fashion means they are more likely to be in the older style than the newer. The gable hood looks like a little box or house on the head and has side panels which might be decorated. The sides are called lappets. A French hood is the one you're used to seeing in art all of the time. It allows you to see the front of the hair, which was considered a bit racy, and it gets smaller and worn further back over time. There's a black veil over the back of a French hood, and on the back of the late gable hoods are two tubes of fabric that flow down the back in a V shape, but can be pinned in various other designs. One little variation is the hood which Mary Queen of Scots wears, and that at the front band has a sort of heart shape. The snoods you see at Renaissance fairs are sadly not in period. Then again, I'm not going to knock your door down with a warrant from the fashion police and demand you stop using them. The Renaissance branch of the fashion police has not returned my calls. Lower-class men wear coifs, generally black, but these are supplemented by a flat hat, and by law you must wear a woolen one to church on Sunday to keep the wool price up. Hats are worn both indoors and out, but at home you might just wear a sort of triangular sleeve that looks a lot like a Victorian nightcap as a hat. Rich men have flat hats, but as time goes on, they get more structure and height, becoming very tall by the end of the reign. They have jewels or feathers as ornaments. Hair is worn short and parted in the centre for much of the reign. Wigs are common, but they are not powdered white at this stage. Styles get longer as the reign continues. Early on, the habit of plucking or shaving the hairline to make the brow taller was very common, but late in the reign bangs come in. A brief word on beards. Once starch becomes easily available, it lets men work on all kinds of weird beards. One I'd note in particular is the spade beard, which was thought very martial. Makeup is used by both sexes. Basically, your goal is to look like the Queen. Well, not the actual Queen, the official Queen. So young, flawless, very pale, regardless of when you are in the reign. Basically, try not to look Spanish. This is why, when you look at portraits of Lord Dudley, he looks like the Queen's brother. The main weapon in looking flawless is a white paint called ceruse, which is made of a mixture of lead and vinegar, and it is so toxic it'll give you boils, and if you swallow enough, it will drive you mad and then kill you. Some people are also bled to get rid of the extra redness in their faces. Other substances were used to add the blush in, or add redness to lips. Kohl was used to outline eyes. Fingernails are polished with a mixture of blood and pig fat, which smells about as bad as you imagine. Men paint out their bald spots or wear wigs, and hairlessness is seen as a symptom of sickness. The trunk. To oversimplify, the basic clothes for women start with a linen smock, and then a petticoat is added, and then this is usually linked to a bodice, which is laced up at the side, or in a spiral up at the back. The French and Italians did have the front-lacing bodices, if you want one, but you're just being fashion-forward. Above this is a gown, which is open enough to see the petticoat underneath at the neck, and is short enough so that the edges of the petticoat are visible at the base. These visible bits are more heavily decorated than the rest. In some cases, there's an extra triangular garment added in the neck area called a partlet, and its goal is to make the petticoat underneath look more expensive. Partlets and matching sleeves are mentioned as Christmas gifts. The skirt shape in noblewoman is guided by a hoop frame called a farthingale. It can be made by reeds or baleen, and over this is worn a riding cloak, if needed. In Ars Magica, metal rings are really useful for certain types of magic, so I wanted to note that a farthingale hoop counts and is rather larger than most rings available to the well-dressed courtier. Men's garments start with a shirt, linen for rich guys, and over that is worn a doublet. This can have boning in it to help men have the desired shape. Doublets have sleeves that, in some cases, are only laced on so they can be removed for separate laundering. Over this, a jerkin is worn, and a jerkin is a sort of sleeveless vest. Doublets and jerkins become brighter as the rain goes on, and rich fabrics and dyes are a sign of high status. The waist of these garments forms a V-shape that points toward the genitals. This is not accidental. The structured garments reinforce this shape. Oddly, later in the reign, the peace god belly becomes more fashionable, and this is a pad that is stuffed in the front of the waistcoat to make a man look fatter, and thus more rich and opulent. You could argue that it's not to make you look fat, it's to copy the cut of an armoured chest plate. You do you in your campaign. Outside of all this, in wet weather, you'd wear a hooded cloak, and the lengths of these vary, but people riding long distances use ankle-length ones, and women have stays which tie to their shoes so that their cloaks can't flare. Cloaks for day wear are more ornamental, have wider shoulders, and can be as short as the groin. Most are between knee and ankle length. On the way through, we've skipped the ruff. Ruffs are, in essence, detachable collars. They're also, in a slight way, a posture trainer, because when you're wearing one, you need to keep your neck raised and stare down your nose at people. They become popular once a Dutch immigrant brings over the techniques for making starch in commercial quantities. We often think of them as white, but blue was also a popular colour. Poor people don't wear ruffs because they are A, silly, and B, expensive. Ruffled cuffs, which match the neck ruff, are similarly not for people who actually have to do things with their hands. While discussing things that poor people do not wear, I was surprised to learn that the Venetian berretta has a parent in England. Rich women going horseback riding wear a black velvet mask to prevent tanning of their faces. This is called a vizard, and it's held in place by clamping a bead in the mouth. Unlike the berretta, they do actually have a mouth hole, so it's possible to speak while wearing one. Men and women wear woolen stockings held in place with ribbon garters, and these are called hose, but they don't necessarily join at the top like modern pantyhose. For men, assume that they wear hose on the lower legs and above them breeches on the top of the legs. The fashion here changes a heap, but in Elizabeth's time, assume that courtiers have long hose and tiny booty shorts. The Queen knows what she likes. For men, when the doublet is short, there's an extra flap or pouch called a codpiece, which hides the genitals, or holds the genitals, depending on how they're tailored. Some men wear two different coloured hose. You wondered where I was going there. Or hose which have striped panes of colour, and these are called pansied hose, and they draw attention to how hot your legs are. In the upper class, this is almost exclusively a guy thing. Venetian hose are odd in that they have pockets in the seams. People don't expect that, so it's a good place for your spies to hide stuff. People wear boots in muck and slippers indoors. Men wear shoes a bit more because they're out and about. Shoes tie over the instep. Accessories. Rich people wear gloves and poor people don't, unless it's for warmth, and that's more of a mitten sort of situation. The problem with gloves is that people can't see the cool rings you've got on your fingers, so cut-off gloves are actually used by some rich people. They're not just for pickpockets. Folding fans are a late thing. The fans they have earlier are made by preference of ostrich feathers, which are imported from North Africa. People wear sables, and these are called flea furs by people into costumery, and I don't know why that is. Women wear earrings. Men wear single earrings. I'm not sure if it's considered a naval thing yet. Some put a line of black fabric through that ear hole instead. I can't see any note in my shallow search about waist belts, but Dudley's wearing one in his favourite portrait. I do see men having baldricks, which is a sort of shoulder strap. It can be used to hold a sword, but it can also support pouches and tools. It can also hold a brace of pistols, but the legalities there are tricky and will need their own post eventually. After the assassination of Moray in Scotland in 1570 and William the Silent in Holland in 1584, the Queen's court freaks out about assassins getting close to Elizabeth with a pistol. Legally, you can only carry one if you have an income of £100 a year, and the barrel is at least a yard long. That being said, the law's enforcement away from the Queen's personal presence is terrible, and no sensible person would ride the countryside without obviously wearing a brace of pistols. You need several, because you don't have time to reload in most battles. Your saga may vary.